I'm Sue Fillion. I'm a planner with the Town of Brattleboro Planning Services Department. We've been working with the Brattleboro Planning Commission to rewrite the town's subdivision regulations. This has been a process that's been going on for quite a while now, and we're at the point where we want to do some education with the public about what the proposed new subdivision regulations include. And so we've prepared this presentation as one step in the public education. So the purpose of subdivision review is that it gives the town a process by which to ensure that there's safe and usable division of land. So if you have a piece of property and you want to create a new lot, then the subdivision regulations would apply. The regulations establish appropriate standards for public improvements. Again, they ensure the creation of developable lots. They're a tool for implementing recommendations of the town plan. And they also seek to prevent the imposition of development costs now and into the future for the municipality. From 2010 until its adoption in 2013, the Planning Commission worked on writing a new town plan. And that effort included a lot of outreach with the public that we drew on to write these new subdivision regulations. This here is a list of common themes that we heard in that outreach for the town plan. So a lot of the public expressed that agriculture is an important part of the town's identity and they want it to remain viable. They wanted to limit development in wildlife corridors. They wanted the town to promote walkable streets and compact development, and we viewed the natural environment and associated recreational opportunities as assets for the town that they felt deserved to be protected. The Planning Commission also drew on the information that they received and the feedback that they received from an EPA workshop that we held last year. So the town was awarded a grant for technical assistance from the US EPA to address small town and rural issues. We chose to focus on integrating smart growth strategies into the town's land use regulations and policies. The technical assistance consisted of a 1.5-day workshop with consultants and culminated in the creation of action steps that reflected the workshop activities. The items listed here were action steps identified by stakeholders that were invited to the meeting through the technical assistance that we received. So one of the action items was to adopt steep slope requirements for new development. And the rationale for that was that much of Brattleboro consists of steep slopes, but we currently don't have any controls on development that occurs. And there are some, there can be some impacts when development takes place on these steep slopes. We also prioritized using mapping information to help landowners identify sensitive natural areas on their property, and then using that information to inform the site plans and development proposals. And the rationale there is that there is a lot of information that is out there in databases, either put out through the state or even that the town has in their own GIS databases. And so we wanted to be able to use that information so that landowners and developers could utilize that information to have better development outcomes. And then the third action item applying to subdivision regulations was to offer and encourage pre-application meetings with developers to discuss their land development ideas. And this is really a way to save time and resources for property owners and developers, and it gives an opportunity for staff to make suggestions and explain the benefits of different development techniques. So why new subdivision regulations? Well, first we want to update the standards so that they are appropriate. Our regulations date back to the 1980s. They tend to promote a very suburban form of development that's not appropriate for all areas of town. In some cases, the standards in the existing subdivision regulations are obsolete, and in other cases, best management practices have changed, such as the way that you maybe handle stormwater. We also wanted to simplify the review process, and we wanted to make them more flexible to promote better development. And so, first, I want to address how we believe that the proposed regulations will simplify the subdivision process. First off, lot line adjustments will be approved administratively. So a lot line adjustment is essentially moving the property line between two existing properties or parcels. Currently, lot line adjustments have to go before the Development Review Board, and this results in added cost and added time. So we believe that lot line adjustments that don't create any non-conforming lots can easily be handled by the zoning administrator, and we want to simplify that process. And we do receive quite a few lot line adjustments every year, so this will be helpful for those applications. We've also created what are called neighborhood subdivisions and rural subdivisions. Right now, the subdivision regulations have a uniform set of standards for all subdivisions, regardless of what type of development or where in town it is. But we feel that Brattleboro has two very different development patterns, a compact developed area and more of a rural countryside. And so we're proposing two sets of standards that have different goals. And then the standards, depending on what zoning district you're in, will depend on which set of standards. And so let's talk first about neighborhood subdivisions. This set of standards will apply to development in all zoning districts but the rural and the rural residential zoning districts. The map that's shown here is meant to show the development pattern that typifies the area. And it's a very common development pattern in the neighborhoods surrounding our downtown and village areas. And the type of subdivision development that we're seeing in these more compact areas is either infill development, so this is the little drawing to the bottom of the screen. This is where you're getting one or two lot subdivisions. You have an existing lot, you're creating a new lot. They're relatively small lots. They're going to utilize the existing road system and they'll connect to the town water and sewer system. And the other type of subdivision development trend that we're seeing is the lot line adjustment, which is the drawing with the yellow on it. And so that's basically, that yellow area is a land swap between two parcels. And we just spoke about that and how we were just going to allow those to be approved administratively. And so the goals for neighborhood subdivision, or the purpose of the design standards for neighborhood subdivisions, is to promote a denser form of development and to continue the existing neighborhood patterns. And so the standards that we have address streets and making sure that they're interconnected. We're looking at lot sizes and lot shapes so that they're consistent with the neighborhood pattern. And this is an area where we want to maintain and extend the sidewalk networks, so there will be requirements for sidewalks. In terms of landscaping, we're looking primarily at street trees and landscaping in the public space. And then if a development has 25 or more units, then we'd be looking at creating some open spaces. So it could be a plaza, square, green, small parks. Otherwise, if it doesn't meet a certain threshold, then there would be no requirement for public open spaces. And so that's neighborhood subdivisions in a nutshell. The second set of standards is for the rural subdivisions. And so these standards will apply to subdivision development in the rural and the rural residential zoning district. And so the purpose, again, of having these separate standards is to protect the countryside, but still allow for well thought out development. And this graphic here just shows two different development patterns that we see in our more rural areas. One is the Hillwinds development, which is kind of more compact and preserves a lot of space around it. And the other is more typical subdivision development along road frontage. And so what are we seeing in these rural areas for development trends? Well, in general, we're seeing maybe 4 lot subdivisions, something in that range, 3, 4, maybe a little bit more new lots being created. They're not serviced by municipal water and sewer because those utilities don't exist out there. We're seeing few new roads. There have been some, but if a road is being created, it's generally a private road. And we are also seeing subdivisions that are taking place along existing road frontage. And this subdivision map here basically shows the extension of a driveway or a private road serving 3 new lots. So that's kind of typical to what we've been seeing. The goals for rural subdivisions are shown here on this slide. They're directly related to the comments we received when writing the town plan and during the EPA technical assistance workshops. The first goal is to minimize land disturbance. Following Tropical Storm Irene, the Planning Commission spent a lot of time talking about ways in which we could change the regulations to reduce the community's risk of flooding. Minimizing land disturbance is an important way to do this, or at least minimizing the area of land disturbance. So the removal of trees, there's a couple of different land disturbance, I guess, issues that we can talk about. When you remove trees and vegetation on steep slopes, it can destabilize them. Land disturbance also will change the existing drainage patterns, and it can result in flooding. It can affect town roads, other properties. Land disturbance can also cause stream bank erosion if you're clearing too close to the stream banks. This can cause an increase in stormwater runoff. Not only does this result in increased flooding or water in the brooks, it can result in increased flooding, and it can also impact aquatic species and by increasing sediment loads. Land disturbance can also reduce the potential for groundwater recharge and water supply. So it can create more impervious surfaces that prevent rain and snow from soaking into the ground. And land disturbance can also result in nutrients running off into surface waters. You may be aware that the Lake Champlain area has strict EPA orders to deal with phosphorus coming from runoff. But there are also problems with nitrogen in the Connecticut River. The next goal is to protect wetlands, floodplains, steep slopes, and riparian corridors. Improperly designed development on steep slopes can result in erosion, building or road failure, and contribute to downstream flooding. Development on steep slopes usually requires a lot of clearing and cut and fill. And again, those are all forms of land development. And so these can all have negative impacts on water quality and result in increased flooding. The third goal for rural subdivision is to treat natural and cultural resources as amenities. We heard a lot in our public outreach that our open spaces and our farms and our forests are real assets for the town of Brattleboro. So a goal is to treat them as amenities. And then the fourth is to permit the grouping of houses to maintain rural character. So the standards for the rural subdivisions, we're basically trying to address 2 issues. The first is that the minimum lot size that we have for these rural residential zoning districts are encouraging rural sprawl. And so we're proposing to change the way we calculate the number of lots that can be created. The second issue is that the existing subdivision regulations don't allow for flexibility. They don't allow for clustering very easily. And so we have new expectations of, and we try to convey this in the subdivision regulations, of how the subdivision gets designed. So first I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about the way that we are going to calculate the number of lots that can be created. Right now, we use a uniform minimum lot size to determine the number of lots permitted in a subdivision. In the rural zoning district, if you need 3 acres per lot. So if you have 9 acres, you can subdivide to have 3 lots. In the rural residential zoning district, it's 1.5 acres per unit. These lot sizes put the landscape at risk of fragmentation. They do not provide a land base large enough for sustainable agricultural, forestry, or protection of important natural functions of the land. And these are all features that Brattleboro identified as attributing to our rural character. So again, we're going to change the way the number of lots that can be created in a subdivision is determined. So the steps that we're proposing is, first, we'll determine a buildable area. Second, we'll determine the number of lots. and then the base number of lots, and then third, we'll apply a density incentive. So the first step in determining the number of lots is to figure out the buildable area of the parcel. So the graphic on the left shows an existing situation where right now we determine the number of lots based on the total parcel acreage. What we're proposing is to use a buildable area approach. And so the graphic on the right shows constraints, some of the features that we consider not to be buildable. And so these are wetlands, surface areas, so surface waters, brooks, ponds, land with a slope of greater than 25%, so that's how we are defining steep slopes. If it's greater than 25%, it's considered steep. And then there is a setback for streams and wetlands, so on the right graphic you'll see a green area, that's the 50-foot setback for wetlands or streams. And so we're just, in that area, we're going to take half the area. And then also what we consider not to be buildable is the area mapped as floodplain by the National Flood Insurance Program. And you will see that in the graphic on the right, we've identified what's not considered buildable, and we've subtracted it from the total parcel acreage. So we go from 7 acres to 4 buildable. Here's another example. The graphic on the left shows that there's 55 acres of land on this parcel, but you're not getting a true picture of what the development potential on that property is like, because on the right you'll see that there is a lot of steep slopes. So that actually reduces it to 22 buildable acres. The next step in determining the number of lots, now that we've got the base number, we're going to take a look at some other factors. So if the parcel is in the rural residential zoning district, you'll have a lot calculation of 1 unit or 1 parcel per 2 acres of buildable area. In the rural zoning district, it'll be a calculation of 1 lot per 4 acres of buildable area. And if you're on a class 4 town highway and that's your only access, it's a lot calculation of 1 lot per 12 acres of buildable area. And so why are class 4 roads not desirable for development? There's a couple of reasons. First, the town is under no obligation to maintain anything but the bridges and the culverts. Some of the class 4 roads in Brattleboro do not have year-round access. And we don't want to make any guarantees of emergency vehicles being able to get up them. And there is the expense of providing municipal services, so any school busing or even just if there's a lot of wear and tear on the bridges and culverts, those are expenses that the town does have to undertake. And so here's an example. This property has 72 buildable areas. You'll see the red is steep slopes or a wetland, and the green is the buffer area. And this property is actually on a class 4 road. And so again, the town's only required to maintain the bridges and the culverts. We don't need to plow it in the winter, so not all class 4 roads necessarily have year-round access. And you'll see the pictures here are a couple of examples of class 4 roads in Brattleboro. And so the conditions can vary. Not all of them are very wide for passing traffic. And bridges are maybe not as substantial as in other parts of town. For the example of the 72 buildable acres, they'll have a lot calculation of 1 lot per 12 acres, and so this is going to result in a base number of lots of 6. But the last step is to apply cumulative density incentives. And so this is an opportunity for a developer to propose a development that meets some of the objectives that we have for development. And it's a way that they can increase the base number of lots. So our density incentives are that if you preserve 50% of the buildable area, you can get an additional lot if the original parcel is less than 30 acres or less. Sorry, less than 30 acres. If you have, you can get 2 additional lots if the parent parcel is 30 acres or more. So again, the incentives are preserving at least 50% of the buildable area. And then if for every increase in 10% of the buildable area being preserved, there are additional incentives that can be had. Another incentives is if you build trails that allow public access. If you provide a 100-foot vegetated buffer around surface waters, so streams or wetlands, if you keep it vegetated, you have an opportunity for additional lots. And if you preserve at least 5 acres of agricultural soil, you can get additional lots as well. And so back to our example of the 72 buildable acres where the base number of lots are 6. The blue circle around the wetland indicates if this property was to put a 100-foot vegetated buffer, they could get an additional 2 lots. If that whole green area was preserved, they could get 2 lots. And if they put in a public trail system, there's an additional 2 lots. So if you add 6 lots onto the base number of lots, then after incentives, this development could have 12 lots rather than 6. And so again, just to review, in the rural and the rural residential zoning district, we're proposing to change the way that the number of lots you can have in a subdivision is calculated. And to do that, we're going to determine the buildable area, we're going to determine the base number of lots, and then we're going to apply density incentives. The other issue that we wanted to address for rural subdivisions is that the existing regulations do not allow flexibility in design. And so we want to impart new expectations of how a subdivision will be designed. So the drawing on the left shows a typical subdivision development where the parent parcel is subdivided such that each new lot meets the minimum lot size and frontage requirements for the zoning district. There's a couple of negatives with this type of development in that it can often create parcels that are too small to be used for forestry and agriculture. It increases the potential for land clearing because each individual can manage their property different, and it therefore it can disrupt existing wildlife habitat and travel corridors. The drawing on the right is an alternate lot layout in which the parcels are clustered. This design still allows for 5 private homes, but in a more compact area of the site. And some of the benefits of the design include that it preserves contiguous areas of land. You can see the yellow arrows that are showing where the contiguous forest is. And it also allows access to the land from the roadway. So that creates a potential for trails on this, which is a nice public amenity. One of the important ways that we propose to be able to encourage the type of development you see on the right is that we will be greatly reducing the minimum lot size. So no longer is it going to be tied to the 1 unit per 3 acres. You actually could have a greatly reduced lot size. And so the drawing on the right potentially could still be good size, or they could be 1 acre, they could be 3 acres, they could be 2 acres. There's a lot more flexibility. You wouldn't just have to meet the 1 unit per 3 acres or the 1 unit per 1.5 acres. And this is another view of the development. You can see that it's kind of clustering it while still allowing for privacy on each lot. And so we want to make this type of development easier in Brattleboro. The existing regulations do not allow that type of flexibility. So we're proposing that a 4-step design process be used in laying out the subdivision. And the steps are to identify the unbuildable areas, to identify second would be to identify cultural, natural, and historic features. The 3rd step is to identify areas that can be developed, and the 4th is to lay out the subdivision roads, lot lines, and utilities. And the purpose of using this 4-step design process is to help to have the applicant fit the development into the landscape in a way that maximizes the protection of important natural and cultural amenities on the site and maintain the character of the community. This next set of drawings is going to walk through the steps, and these are fancy drawings. Obviously, an application wouldn't necessarily need to look like this. So the first step is to identify the buildable areas. So the brown hatched area is the steep slopes that are greater than 25%. The blue areas are the waterways. The green is the buffer to the waterway. And those are the unbuildable areas for this property. The second step is to identify any cultural, historical, and other natural resources. So where is the existing vegetation and wildlife habitat? Are there any wildlife corridors? Any existing trail systems? Are there prime agricultural soils? Is there maybe a barn or some cellar hole? There's a whole list of cultural and historical and other natural resources that a developer would show. The third step is to identify areas that can be developed. And so a lot of these areas can overlap with the historical and cultural resources. Again, we've only set out a couple that are no-build areas, but you'll see in this graphic that the light green areas are where you could do development. And the last step is to add the lot lines and the roads. So you'll see from this drawing here that we've been able to preserve some prime ag soils so that farming can continue. We have smaller lots that are clustered together, so it doesn't feel like rural sprawl because it's got a more clustered development. And of course, this is just one way that this parcel could be developed, but there's lots of other alternatives as well. This drawing also shows that you can continue a public trail system, and so we can expand those amenities within the town. And this is just another view of the development. And so the benefits of the four-step design process are for both the community and the developer. To the community, we will be encouraging development that will have a lower impact to local water quality and the natural environment. We have the ability to retain significant local features and rural views. And there is reduced infrastructure. There's a possibility for reduced infrastructure through the clustering and therefore reduced costs of maintenance. To the developer, there's the potential to produce a quality product that will sell well. It's higher values. There's the potential for reduced infrastructure costs. There's flexibility to develop in a way that avoids costly costs that are associated with building in difficult areas. And there's the possibility to increase the number of homes depending on regulations and bonuses. We have a lot of resources. It might seem like there's a lot of requirements, but we can help. The Planning Services Department can help. So first of all, for a subdivision in the rural residential zoning district, there would be a requirement for a pre-application meeting. So it gives the opportunity to consult informally with the town. We can decrease costs to developers by setting out expectations. We can eliminate inadequate design in the early stages of the process, and we can help developers and landowners obtain mapping resources and information to help inform the development. And so we already have a lot of mapping resources. We have GIS data. We had an intern last summer work with us, and we created a database with the calculations of buildable area for the parcels in town. And there is the Vermont Biofinder database, which is beginning to collect a lot of information on wildlife corridors and rare and threatened and endangered species. So we have access to all of that information to help with the subdivision development. And if you're interested in more information, you can take a look at the proposed regulations on the Planning Services Department page at the town's website, which is www.brattleboro.org. You can contact the Planning Services Department. We're happy to speak with you and walk through or share the information that we have. And there'll also be a public presentation at 6:30 on April 30th in the Select Board meeting room at the Municipal Center. We'll be presenting this presentation again, but there will also be time for question and answer and feedback.